Hello, welcome to this hopefully pretty quick installment of Top 5 Tuesdays. Got a lot of stuff going on. Streaming Arkham Knight on my gaming channel, The Dipwits, and also on Twitch. Getting episodes of Yes done, getting episodes of the RazorwireReviews Battlefield Returns done because I'm going away for a week soon, so I've got to get loads of stuff pre-done. And yeah, so going to try and get a quick one out today. Don't rush it, Luke. So this is Top 5. Top 5 moon movies. Basically films that have something to do with the moon. Now I love the moon. It's a symbol to me of, you know, the rest of the universe in a way, and I'm a big fan of, but I'm a big enthusiast of space and astronomy and astrology and everything that goes along with it. Ever since I was a kid, I used to make reports on space and the solar system in school when we had a project to do something about something that we enjoyed. And a couple of years ago, and last year I should say, my fiancée Connie got really big into the universe and stuff, and now she knows like about 100 times more than I ever did. And so she's an inspiration to me in terms of just knowing more about the universe and the world that we live in. And yeah, I always love just looking up at the stars when it's a clear night. I love looking at the moon, and I'm very fascinated with the moon. It's almost tangible. It's almost there. So you can almost touch it when you see it in the sky, and it's you know, to me it's just like that reminder of where we are, you know. And I love the moon, and I always loved looking at it when I was a kid, and I have memories of just looking at it, like certain spots, certain places I was, you know, at a certain time. I remember walking down the street with my dad. We were just walking through the middle of the road at like midnight. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and we were just looking up at the moon. And yeah, just these weird memories that you have. And I don't remember anything else really about it. So yeah, anyway, right, I said it was going to be a quick video, but I got to really get on with this. Well, by quick I mean about 10 minutes long. Number 5, Trip to the Moon. Georges Méliès, the legendary French film director, but also magician and illusionist, and you know, the father of special effects in films, the father of just the pure raw imagination that can be captured on film, I think. And A Trip to the Moon from 1902 is just one of the greatest films. Well, I wouldn't say the greatest films of all time, but one of the most important films of all time. One of the most famous films of all time. I mean, the image of that face, the moon face, and the rocket crashing into its eye. I mean, it's so fun and so imaginative and so vivid and wild and wonderful, and just, I love the film so much. You know, it's only about 15 minutes long, something like that, and you just see all these, it's a feast of imagination. I just think it's required viewing for any film fan to check it out. Obviously it's not going to stand up to a film from these days, but just looking at it for how old it is, you know, it's what, 113 years old now? Crazy stuff. And yeah, A Trip to the Moon has to be on the list, Number 4 is a film from the 60s, I forget what year it came out, but it's called First Men in the Moon. And this is a brilliant film, absolutely loved it, and this is where the video might get a bit long because I really want to talk about it. But basically the film opens and it's on the moon, and I think the film came out in the early 60s, so before we actually landed on the moon, which we did, by the way, so don't start leaving comments like that. Anyway, so it's early 60s, the film opens, it's present day when the film was made, early 60s, so they land on the moon and they find a note from the 1800s. I mean, it just sent shivers up my spine. Just like, what a fucking opening is that? You know, it was something about Queen Victoria, and then they go and find this really old man who tells the story of when they went to the moon in like 1898 or something like that, late 1890s. And it's a really fun film. There's some Ray Harryhausen effects in there towards the end, and this really funny guy, I forget his name now, but he's a classic kind of British character actor, and he plays this kind of crazy professor, and he's just so much fun. And the idea is so cool as well. The idea is that he's basically thought, right, if I shut the blinds, I'm blocking out the light, I'm stopping light. How can I do that with gravity? And he comes up with this stuff where you can paint it onto a surface, onto an object, and it blocks the effects of gravity, and it shoots up. And so he builds this ship where this little kind of ball thing, and he's got shutters on them with the paint on it, and so all he has to do is pull all the shutters and it just launches up. So they go on this trip to the moon. It's a lot of fun. It's just a kind of really cool kind of like 60s sci-fi film, but just with a lot of fun stuff, and I just really enjoyed it a lot when I saw it a couple of months ago. My mum watched me and my mum watched it, and it was just one of those random things that we saw, and it was great. I'm getting a bit flustered here because I really want to speed this thing up, but that was number 4. Number 3, let me kind of just place myself in this. Where are we? Number 3 would be, I haven't written the list down, but I have it in my head. It's all here. Number 3 is between two films. So it would be, okay, Moon. Moon from 2009. I forget the guy who directed it. He's Bowie's son, isn't he? Duncan something maybe, I don't know. Anyway, Moon starring Sam Rockwell. Awesome film, absolutely just... The psychology of it is brilliant, and basically the whole film, I think there's an actress who's in it briefly, but the most part, the film is Sam Rockwell on this station on the moon, and he's there, and he's operating this little space station and kind of this little facility, and he's going around and stuff, and he's inside his own head because he's just like, you know, he's so isolated, and he's waiting for, you know, his cycle to go back home, and then it just unravels from there. And I don't want to say anything more about it, but it is a fantastic film, definitely worth watching if you haven't seen it. Number two, right, here we go. For All Mankind, 1989 or 88, 1989 by Al Reinert. This is a documentary comprised, and I've talked about this before, it's comprised completely of NASA archival footage from all of the moon missions, the manned moon missions, the Apollo missions in the 60s and 70s. And I always say this, anyone who thinks that they faked the moon landings, look at this film, watch it, analyze it, and then come back to me and tell me again that the moon landings never happened, because you just see all this amazing footage, and I love how it's told from the perspective of the people who did it. There's no narration, there's no, and this was when man decided to step foot on. No, it's just like the astronauts saying, yeah, well, you know, we go up there and we did this and that, and you know, and you just hear these like interviews from the NASA archives all pieced together in a nice chronological way. You know, you got the build up to it, the mission launches, the landing, the touchdown, the space flight, and all that stuff is put together. This is just one of the best documentaries I've ever seen, and it had to be in this list. There had to be a documentary about the moon, and this one to me is the best one that I've seen, and just sums it up better, I think, than anything that was overly produced maybe might be able to do it. This just gives you the bold details straight in front of your face. This is the moon. This is what we did as, you know, as a race of people. No honourable mentions this week because I've kind of cheated with the last one. It's a joint number one. And they're both films about trips to the moon, and they're both very different films. One is before we went to the moon, and is very much speculative in terms of space flight, and the other is about a real trip to the moon, and it was made after we'd been on the moon. So there's kind of two perspectives there, and again, the one that's set before, or the one that was made before we went to the moon in the 60s, is a fictional story. The second one is a true story. The first one is Apollo 13, directed by Ron Howard, fantastic cast, Tom Hanks, Gary Sinise, Kevin Bacon. Great film about the Apollo 13 mission to the moon, which, you know, spoilers, failed. And it's all about them trying to save the men who are up there in space, and they can't land on the moon, but they've got to get back home. And it's an incredible true story, an amazing true story. And I'll always say this when I talk about the film, but when they showed this to test audiences, a lot of the American test audiences said, great film, but the ending was a bit too Hollywood. Idiots. So Apollo 13 anyway is amazing. Ron Howard's a fantastic director. It's a masterpiece to me. It's so brilliantly put together. The acting's great. I love everything about it. I mean, I watched all the documentaries on the DVD when it came out. I was just a huge fan of it. And that is kind of my number one, joint with this film from 1929. Frau im Mond, Woman in the Moon. And you have two opposite ends of the spectrum here. You have the realistic and the fantastic story of Apollo 13, and then you have the flight of fancy and the fantastic story of Woman in the Moon. And then this is, I've talked about it before to death, so I won't go into too much detail. You can probably find me talking about it elsewhere, but it's a masterpiece by Fritz Lang, the guy who famously made Metropolis and M and all those films from the silent era. Well, M's not a silent film, but you know, Metropolis is his most famous film. I prefer this. It's not a better film, but I prefer it just because of my fascination with the moon and the way they deal with flight and space travel. You know, this kind of predicts and predates all, well, not all, but a lot of stuff that actually ended up happening. Fritz Lang consulted with a guy who was theorizing about all this stuff, what would happen if we did have manned missions to the moon. I mean, zero gravity is portrayed for the first time here ever. You know, the countdown to launch, 10, 9, 8, 1, liftoff, that was invented in this film. I mean, I'm sure it would have happened anyway, but the first time anyone thought of a countdown to launch, of a a rocket was here. Also, the idea of a rocket going up with or a shuttle going up with 2 rockets on the side and splitting off when they get into orbit, that was shown in this film. There's a lot of stuff in here that really gets it right in terms of speculation of the future. Of course, when you get to the moon, that kind of goes out the window because they're running around without their helmets off. But I love the fantasy of it and the idea that you can breathe on the dark side of the moon and there's gold there maybe, and it's just a great adventure. The sets, the music, and the build up to the characters, is brilliant. So that's my favourite moon movie, along with Apollo 13. Couldn't decide. They're both great for completely different reasons, and those are my top 5 moon movies. There's not many of them, I guess. I mean, you probably couldn't make a list of like 50 of them that are really good. Maybe not even 20 or 30, but if anyone has any favourites, let me know down below. I know it's a bit of a niche kind of thing, but it was interesting, and I thought that's a good one to go into kind of little. It's not even a genre; it's just one of those things. I mean, there's movies about Mars and movies about whatever, but I thought it'd be a cool one, a different one. So 11 minutes, so it wasn't as quick as I hoped it would be, but I'm like I just get carried away talking about film. So there we go. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you with the next one.
So you might say he's a really nice guy, really, but if fucking don't cut shit with me. He says he's really cool, but I think he's a tool.